I've been looking for that special spark, and I've been looking for it for quite some time now. There's a certain irony to being a critic, a reviewer, an analyst, or whatever I've decided to call myself. In order to be one, you need to have a special love or passion for your selected medium, and I love animation. If I didn't have any interest in it, I wouldn't have made this career choice. You want to watch more and more of it. It's all incredibly inspiring, and it gives you a special kind of light in life, until suddenly, one day, it doesn't. The old cliche is that there's nothing new under the sun, and I've been finding myself without much use for cliches as of late. And the more that you experience, the more that you know the patterns and repetitions in everything. You can hum the whole song upon hearing the first few notes because you know what kind of genre it is, the overall sentiment, and so on. It's actually been a very, very long time since I've enjoyed a new animated movie. Take the Emoji Movie. Everyone said that it was a ripoff. It was either ripping off the Lego Movie or Wreck-It Ralph, and nobody could tell you which one it was a ripoff more of. And there's a reason they couldn't tell you which one it was ripping off more. Because at a certain point, you have to realize that every fucking movie is exactly the same. The Emoji Movie is about someone on the bottom of society who wants something more out of life and will go on this wild quest through several wacky environments in order to attain that, when the person on top of society is trying to crush them. Not every movie has every piece of this, but they have 90% of this. The Lego Movie is another glorified road trip movie. Wreck-It Ralph is another glorified road trip movie. Inside Out is another glorified road trip movie. Onward is literally a road trip movie. Moana is another glorified road trip movie that stars a princess who wants something more, with a cute animal sidekick that they decide to abandon for the most annoying animal sidekick in Disney history. Disney should never animate a chicken for the rest of time. It always ends up terrible when they do. In terms of a creative twist, the only new thing that seems to be done is change if the main character is on the top of society or the bottom of society. Like the original Toy Story movie, it follows this formula to a T, except that Woody is on the top of society as the film starts. More than half of the time when I watch a movie or something, I feel it's just another one of those computer-generated AI scripts, with different names and new wacky environments that all come running together in my mind. It gets to the point where things that are just a little bit different become breaths of fresh air. Teen Titans Go to the Movies is not another movie based on a cartoon about saving their world or their home, because it's really so special after seeing it in SpongeBob, My Little Pony, Hey Arnold, Scooby-fucking-Doo. There's this channel on YouTube, Couch Tea, that basically argues that one movie is another movie, like the Lego Movie being The Matrix. It's easy, because at a certain point, every single movie becomes every other movie. Every book is every other book. Even if it has a new set of characters or settings, you understand the beats before you get to them because that's how storytelling works. It follows these rote set of rules that you know like the back of your hand. It makes so much sense for each thing to happen that anything else happening would break the thing apart. During the Act 2 breakup in a family film, we know that the heroes are going to get back together because anything else just doesn't make sense for what kind of movie this is. People have been taking issue with how hard I've been on cliches as of late, and that's understandable. Being cliched is more of a subjective issue than something like bad characterization or abhorrent visuals. For most people, Back at the Barnyard is a relatively harmless cartoon, but for me, it's one cartoon in 1,000 with nothing distinguishing it from any other. It hasn't given itself a reason to exist. It doesn't justify itself. It doesn't do anything that we haven't seen before. It's not worth the animation and effort that was put into it. It doesn't do anything unique or novel. Why waste your time on any of these stories or any of these characters when it's been done 1,000 times in other places? And as such, I'd have liked it a lot more if it was as bafflingly bad as something like Elf Bowling, because for the love of God, Elf Bowling is unique. I still remember what happened in it. This isn't me speaking to the objective quality of any of these products. This has been a problem with me as a critic for a while. I've probably pissed off a bunch of people by saying shit about Wreck-It Ralph and Inside Out and the Lego Movie. Before I get any more comments, those are good movies. Hell, I'd even say that they're great movies. Inside Out, Once Upon a Time, was my favorite Pixar movie. If you're not a film buff or a bookworm, I don't know if any of this means anything to anyone though. The best way I can describe it is like listening to Christmas music. We've all heard Jingle Bells, right? What's your favorite rendition of the song? Chances are, most of you, I'm guessing, probably couldn't point to a specific version of the song, because everyone has sung it. And if you can point to a certain version of it, it's probably because it's so different from all the rest. Eventually, they all ring together as an amalgamation of Jingle Bells. At a certain point, Inside Out becomes like a really good rendition of Jingle Bells. You could be the most talented person on earth, but you're still wasting your time and your talent on a goddamn Christmas Carol. And this became a bigger and bigger problem. It grew like a cancer. I've had a harder time enjoying Inside Out as I used to. Same with Frozen, Lion King, Aladdin, Steven Universe, Friendship is Magic, Gravity Falls, The Loud House. It's one of the reasons that, for the most part, I've stopped doing Admirable Animations. Because once you know how the story goes, the only thing different, the only thing that you actually start noticing are the flaws. Friendship is Magic takes like a full season to actually get good. Steven Universe takes longer, and then it puts saving the world on hold to have a birthday party, and so on. 9 times out of 10, a slice of life anime movie will have a climax that comes out of nowhere and does not contribute to the overall product for no other reason than to have a climax. And then one movie changed everything. Inside Out is no longer my favorite Pixar film anymore. Not because I've seen its plot and character types a million times. It's not my favorite Pixar film because Soul is the best damn film that I've ever seen. I'm not kidding. I've sat on it for like a month trying to think about how I really feel about it. I've had a habit of experiencing a new media and just determining that it's my favorite thing ever, only for me to soften on it as time goes on. Frozen is a good example of that. From best Disney movie since Hunchback to 7 out of 10 at best. But no, I think that Soul is my favorite film of all time because it has affected me in a way that most other media has not. It's one of those rare pieces of media that just comes out of nowhere and tells or shows you exactly what you need to hear when you need to hear it. And that just lets you let something go and breathe. And I do want to say this ahead of time. Most reviews are a certain level of subjective, obviously, but I'm making it clear that much of this review is how the movie affected me on a more existential and a more personal level. Like, most people out there are probably more casual experiencers of media. They don't have experiences where they've marathoned the same film on loop for 3 days in a row, watched every single episode of The Simpsons to rank them all, or read a book every single day for a year. They just occasionally watch a movie or a television show, or once in a while read a book. The main thesis of this review is that Soul is a different kind of film, and that can be a turn-off for some people. It's unlike any other Pixar film for a variety of reasons. However, one of those reasons that people often give, I don't think is true. A lot of people say that this is a Pixar film for adults, or has much more of a focus on the adult side of the story than most Pixar films, which is not true at all. I know that a lot of people have forgotten about this because of how Pixar has behaved for the better part of a decade, but they've always had more adult-focused stories than Disney. Most of Pixar's films' main characters have been adults, which is rare for children's media in general. Films like The Incredibles and Up did have child main characters, but they focused much more on their adult characters than their child characters. The first film that didn't was Brave, 15 years after Pixar's inception, and they've always dealt with more adult themes. The first Toy Story movie is about the jealousy between an old toy and a new one, but it's also about the more existential adult fear of obsolescence, being replaced by someone better than you. While Toy Story 2 is about the debate between immortality and making the best of your life here and now, with the knowledge that it's not permanent. WALL-E isn't just about a robot trying to save a plant. It's about the debate between a sheltered, safe life or a more dangerous but free one, a debate that grows more important and more relevant every passing day. The Incredibles is about a family of superheroes, and yet the mother of it, Helen, believes that her husband is having an affair within it. Try telling me that the first 10 minutes of Up isn't adult, or the rest of that film, for that matter. Sure, it's about talking dogs and colorful birds, but it's also about meeting your inspirations and realizing that they've gone in a direction that you can't really approve of. It's about living your life after fate knocks it down. The best of Pixar films are sort of on this wavelength, and that's the wavelength that Soul is on. In my mind, this movie is a lot like The Hunchback of Notre Dame in a way. At a certain point, that movie became my favorite Disney movie. As a kid, that was because it was a very relatable, ugly duckling type story with great music, beautiful visuals, and endearing characters. As time went on, though, my understanding of the film changed, and I liked it more and more. It was still my favorite movie, but now it was more my favorite movie because it was darker. I understood the deeper implications. I appreciated the writing and how difficult it must have been to put all of this together, how daring the choices were at the time. And I was able to look past the fact that the whole movie takes place in January in France, despite only seeing any sight of snow or cold in the prologue backstory. Soul is a movie about finding yourself and what makes you, while answering some abstract or philosophical questions that can shine a new light on that life. And to me, that doesn't sound like something that kids wouldn't understand. The movie has two main characters. Joe Gardner, a part-time band teacher who just got a shot in life. Ultimately, before he ends up taking that shot, he dies. Not ready to accept his fates, through a circumstance, he ends up in the Great Before. The Great Before is where souls exist and grow before they are ready to venture out into the world. Through a misunderstanding, Joe is instructed with helping 22 find out who they are and give them that special pass so they can finally be born. Unfortunately, that's not an easy task. task. Each of the souls gets their number by the number that they were more or less created. The only other number we get in the film is Soul 108 billion. And if you don't know, it is theorized that there have basically been about 108 billion human beings, ever, since human beings have first appeared like millions of years ago. And 22 is not an abbreviation or shortening. 22 is literally the 22nd soul ever created, out of 108 billion. It's also a clever pun on the term Catch-22. 22 wants to get rid of their Earth Pass, but the only way they can do that is by wanting to exist on Earth, and at which point they would no longer want to get rid of their Earth Pass. It is a Catch-22 situation for them. So that should give you a bit of an idea of the task at hand. Eventually it becomes a body swap film as 22 gets stuck in Joe's body and Joe gets stuck in the body of a cat. And as a body swap film, it's definitely a decent one. While we see it plenty in episode-to-episode television cartoons, it's not too often we see it in a full film feature. Your Name is the only one I could think of, and that's not a kid's movie. As a body swap movie, it doesn't manage to avoid all of that story type's trappings, but in many cases, it manages to have its cake and eat it too. I complained a lot about the voices are mental trope. It is probably one of my biggest pet peeve with a body swap story. We've seen this in most body swap stories and cartoons, where once two people swap bodies, they end up having each other's voices. It's been in Jimmy Neutron, Teen Titans, Gravity Falls, Danny Phantom. The reason I don't like this trope is because it tends to break the believability of the story, along with being a very big wasted opportunity. Oh, Cindy sounds exactly like Jimmy. How the hell does no one notice this? Do they not know what Jimmy normally sounds like? It also robs a lot of the possible fun of a body swap story. How much better would it have been if we had Dipper's voice actor talk in the same inflections about like boy bands and sleepovers like Mabel does? Like I said though, Soul has its cake and eats it too. When 22 and Joe are talking to each other, they are in their default voice. But when it's someone else hearing the voices, they hear Joe talking as Joe, and the cat as well, a cat. The writing is very good, and it knows when to use each style to maximize their effectiveness. They know when Jamie Foxx or Tina Fey is better used to bring out each line in a dramatic or comedic fashion. A lot of people don't tend to like body swap shenanigans, speaking of cliches, you know, accidentally messing up someone's life or worse, doing it intentionally, and there is definitely some of that in this film for sure, but I think that kind of stuff is a lot more forgivable here, because the setup is a bit different than your usual body swap story. A soul who doesn't want to become human becomes a human, and the human that does want to be human becomes a cat. That's definitely more on the unique side when it comes to a body swap story. I said this in the Your Name review. The strength of a body swap story depends on how strong the characters are and how unique their lives are. And here's the interesting thing about Soul. They repeatedly make it clear that Joe has a pretty typical life, if not an outright mediocre one. It's actually integral to the plot. 22, throughout all of their existence, has seen all of the greats, people accomplishing amazing things and changing the world. And that hasn't convinced them to want to live. Meanwhile, we have Joe, who just died before his big break. He believes he hasn't done anything with his life, and is yet desperate to get back to it. I guess I could have been more clear on what I said in the Your Name review. Joe is a very strong character, and while the film takes great efforts to make his life seem typical, there are interesting things about him. The film goes through great pains to showcase his lifestyle, his relationships with their own complexity, and his passion for jazz and the piano. There's an art to finding something interesting in the mundane, and I think that's what Pixar mastered beautifully here. There's intrigue in the mundane, and there's beauty in the everyday. It's one of the main points of the movie. A man being interested in playing the piano is not interesting, but showing how passionate that Joe is about it, using it to get brief glimpses at his relationship with his father is just beautiful. And seeing how he gets into the flow really makes you want to see him succeed at this. And I can't credit this enough. The way the movie showcases the concept of flow is genius. If you don't know, flow is a mental state. It's usually only referenced in terms of artists, but it can crop up in all kinds of interesting places. Like right now, as a writer while writing this, you get so into the zone that the keyboard just disappears, as does everything else. And all that exists is what you are doing, what you are creating. It's like playing a video game, and you get so into it that there is no barrier between you and the character you're playing as. There's no controller, there's no screen, you're just in the game. And I love that they touch on obsession, and how the state of flow can envelop someone so wholeheartedly. People so lost in a flow where eating, sleeping, and going to the bathroom becomes secondary to the state of just doing, being. Like Moonwind says Tetris is a joke, but take it from someone who's been there. Little things can become big obsessions. The Great Before is also a really cool concept. It's obviously been done before on some level. We've had movies like Storks with Factory's 4 Babies, but it's nice to see something more philosophical or abstract for a place that philosophy and even religion tends to neglect. What we were before our journey began, and more importantly, why we decided to do it. I think we've all been in the place of 22 at some point, where Earth just looks or feels like a hellish planet, and why the hell would anyone want to give it a go, spark or no? Why would anyone want to do this stupid shit called life? Things are loud, they can be painful, there's difficulties in relationships, embarrassment, and yes, even sudden death. You have no idea what you're doing at any given time, and every move could be a mistake. But at the same time, there's pizza. Soul is a very philosophical film, and it subscribes to a philosophy that's often derided, that being hedonism. If you don't know, hedonism is the philosophical belief that pleasure is the highest good. It's what you should spend your life seeking out. When it is shown in media, it's usually those who are incredibly selfish. They're getting fat and sleazy and just looking for the next high. In the real world, most people who claim to be hedonists subscribe to a subset called ethical hedonism, where the goal is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, and not just you, but in everyone around you. It's a philosophy that definitely has some of its own tangles that you can get trapped in, if you end up weighing pleasure or pain more. But personally, I think that it does have merit as a philosophical view, and I don't really like how it gets derided so much. All too often in our lives, we're stuck looking at the big picture. Our lives in the grand scheme of things. One day, we'll do X, Y, and Z. Some of us know that we're going to be huge successes. Some of us know that we're going to do something great or important or deep with our lives. Some of us know that we're going to graduate, go to college, buy a home, and start a family. We only tend to see our lives in aggregate, and there's definitely a merit to having a plan, absolutely. But at some point, we get so obsessed with the future and where we're going that we eventually forget where we are. And we're going to get into spoiler territory for this. I know this film is extremely new, and it would technically be still in theaters as I write this, but it's just how I do things here. I like to analyze films as a whole, and Soul is a film that definitely deserves that. I need to talk about every single part of it, including the ending. Every single part of Soul is important to its overall themes. The film shows both ends of constantly chasing down a future. At the start, Joe falls into a sewer and dies right before finally making it. And because of this, he sees that his life was meaningless. Throughout the film, though, we see the people that he affected, the students that he inspired, and the connections that he had with other people in his life. How important he was and is to those around him. Whether or not your life is meaningless tends to be all about perspective. And when you're constantly looking to the future and not looking at the here and now, you end up not seeing the good of the here and now and appreciating life in the moment and your place in life. At the end of the film, though, Joe does make what he considers his big break. He now has an ongoing gig as a musician, and he has an amazing time playing. And then the movie keeps going, and Joe doesn't feel any different. Like, let me tell you, that's a moment of this movie that hit me hard on a deep personal level. To talk personally for a minute, I'm 28 years old, and at 28 years old, I've done a lot with my life. Like, I've always taken the follow your dreams thing to heart. Like, a lot of people want to write a book or make a documentary or make a cartoon eventually. Well, they tend to hold off on it, either because life has other plans, or they have a heavy hesitation. Maybe they're afraid of failure. Within my own head here, I don't ask why, I ask why not. And I tend to not get an answer, so on the drop of the hat, I write that book, I make that documentary, I start a YouTube channel not knowing where the hell it'll go, and I get to working on that cartoon. So when the book is written, something you've wanted to do for your entire life, or whatever your big dream is, you then get one scary as hell question. Now what? I mean, you won the game! You did the big thing! It's time to close the curtain, make the call, and roll the credits. This is where the movie ends. Except your life isn't a movie. It doesn't end there. And quite honestly, this is why I love Soul's ending. If you don't know, Soul's ending kinda has a broken base. A lot of people don't like how vague it is. We never learn if Joe goes with his teaching gig or the band gig. We never learn what actually happens to 22. And so many questions are left unanswered. Joe just breathes and walks off camera, and the movie ends. Any other ending would not have worked for Soul, because the movie is directly about life. A lot of people don't realize this, but the title card for the film doesn't appear until the ending. It's not like The Lion King where it's placed at both the beginning and the end. It's only at the ending, as if to say, this is where Joe's story begins. When Rocky wins the championship, he is the champion and the movie ends. When someone in the real world becomes the boxing champion, they go home and they begin preparing for the next boxing match. The rest of their career will be defending their title until they retire or lose it, because real life is not a movie. There's a certain irony to the increased demand for realism in our media and in our cinema. Art attempts to imitate life, almost always. But if it should ever truly succeed at imitating life, people see it failing as art. And Soul is one of those films that manages to imitate life quite well. And that can be a turnoff for some. People like the typical 3-act structure and the familiar story beats that you get time and time again. The hero with 1,000 faces. It gives them comfort. People want music that have the requisite 4 chords of pop because most people don't listen to music to be challenged. They want something that they're more familiar with. Trust me, if an ending is vague for no reason, I'll be in the front of the line complaining about it. But there is merit to the ending of Soul. Making a definitive answer as to what happens at the ending would end up destroying the entire integrity of the movie, because Soul is not about definitive ends. The movie rejects that idea wholeheartedly. Which is also why I'm not against the idea of Joe getting to come back to life either, even though I'm usually against that kind of quote-unquote cop-out. It's not so much the movie is against plans or dreams, but the movie makes a statement that life and dreams should be about the journey and not the destination. It wants you not to think of your big dreams as a being, but a doing. For example, being a huge musician is a nice idea, but if you don't appreciate being a musician and playing music, maybe it's not the right idea for you. It's a theme that we see again and again throughout the movie. With Dez, we see that his life is completely different than what he planned. He wanted to be a vet, but now he's a barber and he finds happiness in his completely unplanned life. Meanwhile, the musician in the subway is living out his dreams, just playing music, but he doesn't seem to be doing well financially. He could be just a step up from panhandling. On the flip side, you've got Paul, who is doing well off, at least enough to buy snacks and go to a barbershop, but he has deep pains inside because he gave up on his dreams a long time ago. And we even see this dichotomy through Joe's parents, their conflicting views on the world and following dreams, and what they had to do to allow Joe's father to follow his dreams. A lot of people complain about these stories not being well expounded upon, but this isn't a movie about these characters, it's a movie about these themes. So I think it's okay for them to just discuss them in these small vignettes and then move on, to further elaborate and establish on the themes. That is what the movie is about. We don't see what eventually gives 22 their spark, either. It could have been the pizza, or it could have been talking to the men in the barbershop, or it could have been the maple seat at the end. And it works, because it doesn't matter what specifically gave 22 their spark. Even though we have our talents and our personalities, we're not predetermined to do this or that, and thinking about our own destiny tends to leave us feeling empty in the end. Living day to day in the here and now is something that should be appreciated, keeping in mind the risk of obsessing and totally forgetting the future. I mean, when you get down to it, the premise of this movie is the cutie marks are bullshit, and I think it's very narrow-minded saying that kids can't appreciate this film, even as something like a cute, funny, cat body-swapping antics movie. I think this movie is something that can really speak to kids on a personal level. Kids can use this message just as well as adults, perhaps even more so. Like, we have this habit as a society of asking 8 and 9-year-olds who know nothing about the world what they want to be when they grow up, what they want to spend 40 years doing, a length of time they have literally no comprehension of. The movie tackles that head on and helps put it in a perspective in a way that kids can easily understand. Joe is the one who knows exactly what he wants to do. 22 is completely unsure though, and is afraid that they'll be bad at whatever they try to do. It's relatable for kids that don't know their path in life, and basically says that that's okay, and also says that the people who are sure might not be that sure in the long run. And that's okay too. Plans can change. We're not stuck in some kind of destiny like it's the medieval ages. I mean, we as a society should probably stop expecting 8 and even 18-year-olds to have their whole life mapped out before they even know what life is. Soul allows young people to ride around in the lives of adults and see the direction that their dreams and, well, directions have placed them. 22 couldn't possibly understand what's so great about the world in the youth seminar, and even in the Hall of Everything, because while they could understand what a pizza was, they couldn't smell or taste, or more importantly, experience it. You could read a book about mountain climbing, study the tools, and learn all kinds of strategies, but you won't know if mountain climbing is really your thing until you get out there and do it. I think it's a great film for kids. It's kind of like Inside Out in a way, that it talks about issues that they might be dealing with by abstracting it, but still treating it with an understanding brush and helping them understand it on a more deep level. It's what actually separates Pixar and Disney films, honestly. Disney films will just have a parent dead because no reason, or we need a wicked stepmother and barely touch on how it affects the characters. Meanwhile, Pixar makes a film like Onward that goes deep into the themes and feelings of missed opportunity that those who have lost their parents truly feel. It might be why some people have had a lukewarm reaction to Inside Out and Onward and Soul. Disney tends to go for the big visual spectacle, which can draw a huge audience, but those films tend to break down under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Pixar goes for the big emotional spectacle, which Either it's something you can relate to, or it's something you can't. Not to say these films, Soul especially, are visually boring or uninteresting. While Soul doesn't go over the top as Finding Nemo or WALL-E, it still manages to do well with its chosen location, New York City. It's a good showcase of how far we've come. The environments and items are largely photorealistic, trying to nail how these places look like in reality, and they do it quite well. And my god, the lighting is especially good in this film. While the people and creatures are animated in their own unique style, it's an interesting one too, and it's nice seeing something like this once in a while. And I will say, it looks pretty great, all things considered. The only exception, I think, is the owner of the cat, Mr. Mittens, who looks like she's from an Illumination Dr. Seuss film. It doesn't give as much opportunity for the wild and crazy visuals that you'd see in Wreck-It Ralph or Inside Out or the Lego Movie, but like I said, sometimes something different is refreshing. And at this point, if you gave me one of the locales from one of those three movies, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you which film it came from. Like, Sugar Rush would fit right in Riley's head. That's not to say that I want every film to take place in reality forever. No, if it works for the film, it works. It also helps the one abstract location they use, the Great Before, stand out much more. It sits a lot easier in the memory, and it's a fascinating place with a bunch of unborn souls shouting hell over and over again. And Jerry, 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 and Terry. If I did have a complaint with the film, the antagonist Terry is really underplayed. I mean, this is a movie that doesn't need an antagonist to begin with, and so Terry doesn't end up affecting the plot, like, at all. The Jerrys don't seem to take Terry seriously, and as such, at a certain point, it feels like they're not really weighing the stakes at all, which is like the bare basics that an antagonist should do. I will say, though, that the 2D animation of the Jerrys and Terry is really cool. Like, the 2D tattoos on Maui and Moana felt superfluous. Like, they didn't really feel interesting at all, besides the novelty of Disney doing something 2D after a decade and a half of doing less and less 2D until nothing at all. How Terry uses the natural lines in reality to hide and move is really clever, and I wish that animation had more entities like Terry. Sometimes we can get like a living shadow or something, but this is a totally new spin on that kind of idea. Jazz is an integral theme to the movie. I mean, the movie is called Soul, which is a pun on the spirit within, but also soul music. Jazz is a very interesting genre of music, to the point it can be abrasive to some. It can actually be hard to define what jazz is, but one of the things it's known for is improvisation. While jazz has recorded songs and sheet music, if you play it note for note, generally you're doing it wrong. Someone once told me that one wrong note is a mistake, but 10 wrong notes is jazz. Jazz is all about interesting interludes and personality conveyed through the music, and the identity of jazz is woven into the overall movie. When it comes down to it, the plot of Soul is very simple, even rote, and it does a lot of things wrong from a technical set. A lot of people will tell you that every scene in a product should be important and move the plot along, and yet we've got scenes taking place in a barber shop, or Joe's mother's tailor shop, or stopping to see a musician on the subway, or stopping to feel the wind in a sewer grate. They come across as diversions if you examine the plot as written. The rules of storytelling that these should be important to the plot, they should move things along, and that's probably why a lot of people want to see all of these stories expounded upon, because that's how story works. Here's the thing about the rules of writing. They're made to be broken, if you know why you're breaking them and what rules you're breaking. It is these small moments, these small interludes, when the movie is at its best and it really pops to life. These moments are what the movie is. When it's not moving the plot along and, getting into the zone of its own and just being about life. Like the scene where 22 and Joe's body's talking about Connie isn't important to the plot. But if you're only focusing on what's important, you're doing it wrong. Am I talking about life or the movie? Yes. Movies are about big plots and escapades, but life is not. While we can have plans and directions, don't forget the little moments within them. Plans can and do change, but this isn't something that we should spite. What tends to last forever is the little moments that our plans lead us through. That's what life is. The montage when Joe is playing the piano is my favorite Pixar moment. It beats the opening of Up in my mind, and Ego's criticism of Gusteau's restaurant in Ratatouille. It's one of those rare things that's exactly what I needed to see and hear when I needed to see and hear it. Most of our favorites aren't just about what the product is. It comes from the time that we experience it as well. Even in my own grand adventures, it's not the successes that I tend to remember. It's the moment-to-moment talking and meeting with people. The smaller everyday joys are what hold up after time, and the connections that we all make with people, with ourselves, and with the world around us. Life is all about perspective, and sometimes we need to get reminded that we have to learn to enjoy it in the moment. Soul says that waiting for your light to start is a foolish mistake, because that already happened long ago. You're already living your life, so live it. Enjoy it as much as you can. Keep plans in perspective, but keep your mind focused on the journey. The question of now what is one of the most philosophically difficult questions out there, and the answer came in the form of a simple movie, really. The trick is that it's the wrong question and not one you should be asking. Don't just follow your dreams. Make your dream following your dream. Also, the movie's pretty funny too, and it made me laugh a lot.